Maori muko and in Maori art, you see the koru as being a really important element. Would you say it was the basis for a lot of Maori design work? How do you see the koru in relation to? It's a very simple element, isn't it? Really, and it's used in a myriad different ways. That can we talk about, say, that Maori knowledge of the spiral and the koru? Sometimes they're used in extremely simple situations, like the double spiral on the buttock of a male tattoo, and then you get very elaborate networks in the facial muko using the koru and the spiral.
You've got the koru, you've got the Maori koru, which is a stem with a bulb on it. But you can even go even more fundamental than that, and that is that it's a curved line and a ball. You see, because that ball motif also turns up in Maori, and what they used was a wad of a fabric, something like that, and they dipped that into the thing, and they went bop, 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 and that made those balls. You see, but that any of those balls could have turned with an additional stripe into a koru. You see, so you can go even further back and split up the koru into this ball plus a curved line. And that is the system that the Maori has understood very well. That he could split up almost anything and start recombining with it to make variations again. And the curved line inevitably becomes a spiral. You see. You move in with the spiral, or you move out.
And you can work an elaborate design system using the spiral, can't you? You can have it in actual fact going 4 different ways, clockwise and anti-clockwise.
And clockwise and any possible mutation you can make with it.
And when you were doing rock art, did you find evidence of this particular painting technique where the fibre was used, dipped in the paint, and then it's actually even pre-stencil, isn't it? They just stamp the motif sort of onto the wall.
Oh yes. It is quite clear that it was done that way. Because that is the most obvious way of doing these things.
Repeating a simple motif.
Yes.
The imprint of a ball of flax or something like that. Stamp, impregnated with charcoal or ochre-based black and red paints. That was essentially the pre-European colour schemes, wasn't it?
It was, yes, the charcoal or lamp soot.
Yes.
And the other one was red ochre, and the other one was a greyish white clay.
Bone.
Yeah.
A fine mixture of, kaolin and
that's
sort
right.
of bony.
But everything that you can possibly do has been done with it.
Yeah. You mean the Maoris have done everything?
Every device based on those principles they have used and exhausted to the limit.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, there's not a trick in this system that they haven't used.
Right. In terms of positive and negative, left and right, and
yes,
inwards and outwards.
The alternate filling in of black and red,
Yes.
by breaking it up. The playing off of one color against the other. They've used it all. Every design trick that modern artists know they have used. So there's nothing alien or nothing strange in that. A modern designer immediately knows that these devices were known to the Maori.
How difficult was it to decipher, for example, symbols that you came in contact with in the caves? Were there any that you found difficult to read and interpret? Or were you able to get to the bottom of
I couldn't read them as such, but I could start. I slowly found out the design principles that they had. I discovered that there were certain mannerisms in the way that they made these lines. They did this work. And you find them out one by one until ultimately you're wide awake to style principle that's going. And that only develops very slowly. You only get it from surveying a whole quantity of work, a large amount of stuff.
Yes. And this would be, how do you see them as being a series of magic and potent symbols related to the moa hunt, related to the mythology, both?
I think that the act of drawing in the rock drawings is a magic act,
Yes.
the exercise of magic. That's why you don't see whole galleries full of them. They were only used on certain occasions when magical invocations were necessary in duress or when there were problems about something. And then it was the Tohunga who created these magical drawings to invoke something or other.
So the symbol of the moa, for example, would be perhaps to provide plentiful supplies of moa. They would be
That could be one reason, but multiple reasons. I mean, the moa might have been a symbol of something else that we don't know of, you see.
like an ancestor.
Something like that. It could have been as a totem, invoked as a totem.
Yeah.
It could have been invoked for any number of symbolical reasons that we don't know anything about. And that hasn't even been handed down to the Maori himself. You see. The clue that we have gained about the rock drawings is from all those people that are still doing rock drawings. So my opinion is based on the findings of people who have made investigations on people who are still making them today or who still have living memory of what these drawings were and what they were done for. And in all of them it is invariably a magical act, invocation of magic, for which symbols were necessary, not realistic things. See, all they needed was symbols. There is an instance, for instance, of the Aboriginals in South Australia, and they crossed over to an island, and whenever they needed to return to the island, to the mainland, they needed the southeast wind. And so to invoke the southeast wind to come up so that they could return, the magician was called for to, or the witch doctor was called for to invoke this wind to come to carry them back to the mainland. Now, the ritual act was, the magic act was, you tie two fish tails together. And this symbol, he invoked the southeast wind by prayer or incantation or chanting. But if they didn't have two fish tails, they drew it on the rock. And the result is a bow tie, looks like a bow tie, which in reality were two fish tails tied together. Now, you see, our interpretation, looking at it, it is a bow tie. The last thing that we can possibly imagine is that it is two fish tails tied together. But there was still in living memory that two fish tails, that represented two fish tails tied together to invoke the southeast wind so that they could return to the mainland. And that is magic, right? And that is the whole significance of the rock drawings in New Zealand. The Maoris needed something, and for that they made a design, a symbol, but we cannot interpret these symbols when the knowledge is gone.
That's a classic, isn't it?
For the Maori, his kuru was the very core of his identity. For as long as he had the kuru, he had his roots. Wherever he came from, he brought the kuru. And it was that kuru heritage that he kept on expanding and changing. It became more complex, it became, they started, the best way I can explain it is this. they had, let me say, a tattoo design for one person. That was the koru in this kind of combination. And there was another combination of the koru that was given to a woman. Now, if the descendants of that family wanted another moko for their children or their grandchildren, something would be lifted of the combination from father's or mother's side, you see. And the combination would make another design. So genealogy, family relationships, created designs. You combine that from that side and that from that side, and that makes a new pattern. Like you combine a K and an M, or an A and a B, or a C and an X. You see, they became configurations when you start combining them. The moko is a genealogy of designs, of patterns. So a marriages were expressed in the form of patterns. If a man had a famous ancestor, it became very important to have in his tattoo that configuration of his ancestor incorporated into his tattoo. See, it had to be somewhere, and that had to be incorporated in other designs. And then there had to be one part that was uniquely his. No other person had that one. And that was very simple. All you had to do was be creative. And then you have a unique design that no one else had. They did not need to do any bookkeeping on it.
And those areas, that sort of
mathematical chance saw to it that would never occur.
be the same. And those, those symbols often occurred up here in this area, a sort of a triangular area here.
That's
Do you know? And then where the double spiral is here, you would get sometimes quite an individual. I mean, some of them.
Sometimes they would eliminate
the double
the spiral on one side and make a filling in that was completely different.
Yeah.
They could innovate whatever they wished.
There was no symmetry, and we tend to believe that one side was very similar to the other, but in actual fact they were quite.
If family history made it important, then they would do away with symmetry. See?
Yeah.
Because that thing was far more important than merely creating a symmetrical design or a pretty design.
Right. It was a very meaningful and potently charged design.
Yes.
That the initiated could interpret.
Yeah.
And read almost.
Yeah.
Like the designs on Maori carving.
You see, the combinations of these things had names,
Yes.
the korus. So Maoris could pass on to each other what another person's tattoo was, but merely referring to these combinations. So chieftains were known to look at a stranger who arrived at the pa and say, "You must be so and so, because we have heard your design is such and such and such." And that combination was known. And they'd never seen the man before. But the moment that the Maori tohunga of tattoo got a commission, there was a lengthy discussion about what designs do you want from such and such a relative, such and such an ancestor. And that was carefully worked out before he would even begin to tattoo. See, all the things were clearly defined by the customer and the tohunga before he would start.
A commission piece.
And I imagine that he would have done the design in the dust first with his finger.
I see.
See, and says,
Yes.
and do his preliminary sketch and consulted his customer and said, "This is the solution I have that incorporates all that you want. Is this good enough?" And the man would say, "Yes, I approve. I know this includes that, that includes that, and it includes that. It's got all the right things in it. Go ahead." And then they would proceed.
The time that it took to do these tattoos, these mokos, a commission might be done over quite a long period of time.
Quite a long period of time. It was done in stages that all depended also on the sensitivity of the patient,
Yes, right. And his
the man to be
and his
tattooed.
strength.
And some of them would insist to have done so deep that their cheeks would be punctured.
Yeah.
And it's known that some that had been tattooed, they started smoking afterwards, and the smoke came through the punctures in the cheeks.
Is that? Have you seen many of the tattoo implements? I guess you had in places like the Canterbury Museum. They have fairly big collections. Did you have access to that sort of material? I
Yes.
guess you would.
Yes.
You'd have looked at that, the pumice bowls, and would they have used skulls and craniums, for example, for mixing in?
No, inconceivable. Inconceivable.
Uh-huh.
It was a highly taboo kind of thing, in which the containers could never be used for any purpose but for that particular man. So they could never be used for any other purpose. Sometimes they were even destroyed. A chief, for instance, if a European had served a dish on a plate, that plate had to be smashed, to the great consternation of the Pakeha who fed them, because they didn't understand that once a chief had eaten off that plate, I mean, that was taboo. Nobody else could use it anymore.
Tell us about some of the tattooing implements that you've seen in museum collections.
Well, the sense of it started for me when I started to count the lines with which kurus were defined. You see, and in most cases it is either 2 lines or 3, depending on what situation they are. So that immediately explained why you have chisels with 1 line, 1 tooth, 2, 3, and sometimes as many as 4. You see, as soon as they got onto these eyebrow things, that started off first with 1 line, and then the next stage with 2 lines, but the final stage out here was the full 4. And that required, for perfect parallel grooves, the 4 teeth in a chisel. So they all had their own particular purpose, the chisels.
Yes, indeed.
I was mystified how they could do that very fine, exact kind of parallel lines in Moku, until I saw the chisels. That made sense.
And they would just be hit with a piece
They
of
could,
hardwood,
that
perhaps, or something.
a stick, a hardwood stick,
Yes.
and that stick, they tapped it, and that went right through.
Yes.
A firm tap.
Pigment bowls. Have you seen many elaborately decorated pigment bowls? Some of the tools of the tattooist were quite
Pigment bowls were again taboo, but they were only taboo to a family. So only people of the family could be tattooed with the suit that was inside that bowl. And that was soot, and that soot was mixed with fat, and that was given to a dog and passed through its digestive system, and that worked like a fixer.
The dog.
Yes, and that was powdered again.
Yeah.
See. But once it had passed with the digestive juices of a dog, then it had it could be that it had a far more stronger fixing quality about it. But once it was in that container, only members of the family, of the lineage,
Yes.
could be tattooed with that same substance that had been collected in that bowl. That was highly taboo. No one else could use it.
Now, some tohanas would be reasonably itinerant and move around and would have quite, distinctive styles.
They traveled great distances wherever there was a famous, we would call a designer. In other words, a very fine tattoo artist. They would travel far and wide to do a chieftain. And it depended very much on how well they were paid. See, because if they were treated badly as tohungas, they'd make a crooked tattoo. And it was irrevocable. I mean,
Do you know anything about the payments that they received? Would they be things like lumps of greenstone, for example? That was a currency, wasn't it?
they would be mostly given in food. It would be food or goods, whatever they desired, you see.
Traditional Maori
That's right.
exchange.
Yes. But whenever a chieftain was very mean, it would have an immediate effect on the tattoo that was being done on him. You see, and they were always taunted by other chieftains when they saw that the man had a crooked tattoo. They would be addressed as, "Hey, you with a crooked tattoo," which also meant that he was rather mean, that he didn't pay his tattoo artist very well.